Hello and welcome. So today we're going to be looking at our second video at subsidies, and specifically looking at subsidies, elasticity and the impact to the externality. So at the end of the last video I left you with a question. I asked you what would happen if the subsidy was given to the consumer instead of the producer, and what I hope that you guys did is that you were able to see that obviously if the subsidy is given to the consumer and not the producer, then obviously that is going to shift out demand, because at the same price level consumers can afford to enter the market or to buy more in the market, and therefore the price level will increase. If the price level increases, then that is a price mechanism and signals that other firms should enter the market, or firms within that market should extend their supply, and therefore you end up with more supply and more demand in the market, exactly the same as before. But it's interesting because there are time lags involved between if there is a shift out in demand, does that always lead to an extension of supply? There is not like kind of just the basics of firms kind of using old stock or whatever else. Like, does it actually lead to more supply in the market? Whereas if you give firms a subsidy, then that will lead to a quicker extension in supply. So it's interesting, and you might want to have a look at the solar panels subsidy for consumers, or have a look at whether consumer subsidies are more impactful or less impactful than producer subsidies. Okay, so I have a question for us to start off with. I want you to think about this question, I want you to draw the diagram, I want you to answer it as well as you can, and then we're going to go through it together. So the question is this: a subsidy is awarded to firms for using renewable energy. The subsidy will give 30% of the benefit to the consumer. Show the impact of the subsidy on a diagram. The original price equilibrium is 150 and the subsidy is also 150. Okay, so have a go at doing this, and then we're going to have a look at what you should have produced together. Pause the video, have a good crack. This is what you're kind of expected to provide. So we can take this step by step and I'll show you how we got to this answer. So firstly, you want your original diagram first with your original supply and demand, and you can see the original price equilibrium here, and I've kept this as a hash so you can see that that's the original price equilibrium. Then you want to kind of show that the shift in the supply curve, because obviously we know that there is a subsidy which is going to shift out the supply curve, and we can see here that there's been S to S plus S. And you have a new price equilibrium here, well, a new quantity equilibrium and a new price equilibrium as well. So we also know that at this diagram the original price equilibrium was £150. We are going to be assuming that it's just a set subsidy. It's not going to be like per unit subsidy, which is going to increase the gradient or decrease the gradient. It just means that it's per unit. We usually do straight shifts for subsidies at A level. You don't necessarily do the kind of ad valorem subsidy diagram. You don't see it as often. So there's been a shift out of supply. Now, firstly, we would just draw the normal, well, my advice would be to draw the diagram and then put the numbers in afterwards. So we've seen the shift out. We go from the new equilibrium, exactly the same. Remember, always go from the new equilibrium to the old one, because what you're showing is the impact of the subsidy. So you want to look at the new equilibrium and how much it would have cost you to produce that pre-subsidy. So you go straight up to here, and then you go across to here, and then you're going to draw the kind of box here to start off with, which is going to be the size of the subsidy in the market. Then you're going to look at whether or not it is going to be all on the consumer or whether it's all going to be on the producer. Now we know that the size of the subsidy is 150, and we know in the question that it's going to be 30% for the consumer. So therefore we know that there is going to be a price fall for the consumer, and we know that it's going to be 30% of 150, which is 45. So we know that the price for the consumer is going to fall by 45 pounds, and then we know the other benefit to the producer, so the additional amount it would have cost them, but actually that they are staying at the same cost level, is going to be 70% of the subsidy, which is here. We've shown that here, and the price has increased. So we know that we can show the exact amount is the producer and the consumer. So it's just a different way that the exam board might ask you to show the impact to consumer and producer. So for me, I always do the diagram and the shift in the diagram and the theory side, and then you can just put the numbers in, work them out and quickly put the numbers in. Equally, they could have asked you about the change in quantity demands if it gave you some more information about the some of the original numbers. So, here is our next question that I want us to move on to, and I want you to be thinking about when we look at subsidies, because remember, subsidies are a form of government intervention, and the government intervenes for some pretty specific reasons, and most of the time the government is intervening so that they can reduce market failure. Now, that's not the only reason that they intervene into the market. Subsidies are kind of a unique example. Remember, in last lesson we had a look that they might be intervening into the market to kind of as a cheaper way to deal with a potential problem or outcome in the market. So for instance, it may well be that there is a failing industry in the market, and actually by subsidising they are able to reduce the impact at a cheaper rate than if they were to just allow the market or the industry to fail. But actually, for this example right here, we're going to have a look at what happens when they're intervening to correct market failure. And the market failure is consumption of a merit good being less than it should be. So if the government are using a subsidy in the hopes of increasing consumption of a merit good, do they want the market, the demand of that market, do they want it to be elastic or inelastic? So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and I want you to have a go at answering this question. Now you can write a paragraph and have a go and write it kind of logically, or you can draw a diagram and prove it that way, but you need to draw a diagram or an explanation, a written explanation. Off you go. You can prove this in many ways, but the easiest way for us to have a look at this is to just think about what is going to happen in the market if it was inelastic to start off with. I've got a very inelastic demand curve there. What is going to happen to the impact of the subsidy if it is inelastic? So we just do the exact same thing. All I've done here is just draw the original diagram. So we go from here out to here. So this is our obviously shift out of supply curve because the cost of production has fallen, and we have a new market equilibrium here. And then to find the impact of the subsidy, we just do exactly what we've been doing before. We go from the new equilibrium up to the original price line, and obviously we want to know our new quantity equilibrium and our new price equilibrium here too. So the first thing that you should notice, because it's inelastic, that the fall in price led to a less than proportionate change in quantity demanded, and we can see here that the consumer has benefited more than the producer. Right? So the consumer is benefiting more than the producer on that one. But has the subsidy led to a higher consumption of the merit good? There is higher consumption, but it's nowhere near as high as the change in the price. Obviously, in nature, it's going to be less than proportionate. And let's have a look at the impact if it is particularly elastic market. So again, we've got the exact same supply diagram. You're going to shift out your S because you want your supply with subsidy. You have a new price equilibrium and a new quantity equilibrium. And here we can see that the fall in price is more than proportionate to the fall in quantity demanded. We find the impact of the subsidy by going up to the original line and across. I don't have a ruler. You will be able to do this a lot better when you've got a ruler in front of you. And then we want to find the impact to the consumer and to the producer. So what is happening here? That smaller decrease in price has led to a more than proportionate change in quantity demanded. So if the government is aiming to increase consumption of a merit good, which one are they going to choose? Well, they're going to choose this one, which is obviously elastic, because that smaller change in price is going to lead to a more than proportionate change in quantity demanded. So they want the market to be elastic, to be able to be most responsive to the price mechanism that they are adjusting. Because the more responsive to the price mechanism that they are adjusting, in this case, the better it is for them. So another quick question for you here. When would they want this, right? So when would they want to provide a subsidy or reduce the price of an industry that is not going to increase the quantity demanded, but it is going to reduce the price by a lot? What kind of industries would the government want to subsidise for this to happen rather than this to happen? Have a think about it, write some stuff down, then we're going to go through it. You need to think about what they're aiming to do if they want the market to look like this. If they want the market to look like this, then they're obviously aiming to do something very specific. They want the price to fall. So it's some kind of good where they want the price to fall, but they don't want consumption to rise, right? So they want the price to fall, but they don't want consumption to rise by very much. So what kind of industries might a government want the price to fall, but they don't really want consumers to enter the market or to extend the amount they're already consuming in the market? So some of the goods or services that are like that may well be things that are kind of necessities that are bad for the environment. So if you think about electricity or gas, those kind of things like heating, the water, that are essential for human beings to live, and therefore we have such an incredibly inelastic demand. But actually, if the price is very high, it has such a huge impact on your day-to-day standard of living. So you want for your society, for the benefit of society overall, to decrease the price of those goods and services so that individuals can participate more in the rest of the economy, because they're not spending the majority of their income on these goods and services, because they need to spend the majority of their income or whatever the amount of their income is on those goods and services to meet their kind of safety, very basic needs. So some industries that are heavily subsidised are actually inelastic industries, because the government wants to decrease the price for the overall benefit of society, and especially to reduce inequality, because buying a lot of those, or if the price is very high for those types of goods and services, if you think about electricity or heating, if the price is very high, then those who are well off are spending less of their income proportionally than those who are poorer. They're spending more of their proportion. It's regressive spending, right? The pricing is regressive. So therefore, if you want to be able to decrease the price, because if you decrease the price, then the people who benefit most from this subsidy is who? If you decrease the price of electricity or for water or heating, who actually benefits from that the most? Well, it's obviously those who are the poorest in society, because they are the ones who are spending most of their income on those things, and also a decrease in their income might be small, but proportionally it might be huge, and therefore they are able to participate in other aspects of the economy more. So therefore, there are some kind of aspects of our economy that are subsidised despite them not having an elastic demand. It's not necessarily to increase a merit good consumption, and it's not necessarily to kind of save an industry. It equally could you just be able to reduce inequality in certain areas of either regionally or just in the economy in general. So the last thing that I wanted to have a look at is, what is the effect of the subsidy on an externality? So if we are trying to increase the consumption of a merit good, what is the impact of that on our externality? Pause the video, have a go, and then we'll come back and we'll do it together. The first thing that we need to have a look at is what is actually happening with the subsidy. So you are consuming more. So one of the tricks that you might fall into is that you might think that the marginal social cost the marginal private cost is going to fall. But actually that might not, well, that isn't going to happen, because when you're looking at a positive externality, you need to hold that constant. You're essentially holding that constant, and we're looking at changes in benefit. So the first thing that we need to do for this diagram here, I've put all of the lines of the diagram, but I haven't really put any of the points in the diagram so we can see the original impact and then the change, because that is the rules that we have to follow. So our original position is obviously where our marginal private benefit equals our marginal private cost, because we don't have perfect information and we don't value society's utility as much as our own utility. We value our own utility and our own short-term utility as well, not even our own long-run utility, because we don't have the information about our long-run utility. So therefore we're going to consume at this quantity here. This is our private equilibrium, and we are going to benefit this much. But at our private equilibrium, society is actually benefiting this much. So society is benefiting where the marginal social benefit is actually less than the marginal social cost, and therefore we should consume more. And if we did have perfect information and we followed the golden rule of economics, then we would actually be consuming at this point, where it's costing us this much. And we have a positive externality of this size here. And we know it's positive externality because this is making a more than sign, and therefore we're saying that society should consume more than they currently are, which means it's positive externality because we're under consuming. So what is actually happening? What is the impact? So like I said, you might be tempted to say that the marginal private cost is going to fall, right? And but that can't be true. One, you're going to see that that's actually going to increase the externality, but also that's just not the way that we look at externalities in general. Remember that we hold constant our marginal social cost and marginal private cost, and actually we look at benefits, because you can measure any change in cost in benefits. So therefore we can show all of those changes in those lines or in those kind of like data sets here. So what is actually happening if the cost of a demerit good falls? So say for instance education, or kind of healthy alternatives of certain foods, or entrance to kind of like exercise areas, all of those things, if they fall, what is going to happen? Well, your benefit is increasing essentially. So the marginal private benefit is going to increase, because every single unit that you consume, you're benefiting more, because when you look at your marginal private cost to your marginal private benefit has risen. So therefore your marginal private benefit is going to shift. Which way is it going to shift? It's going to have to shift outwards, obviously, because at the same kind of price, it's going to, well, same quantity, you're benefiting more. So therefore, you're going to shift outwards. And your marginal private benefit, it has shifted. You're benefiting more from every unit that you consume. And therefore, your marginal private equilibrium has also changed. So your marginal private equilibrium is now here. Essentially what's happened in the market has you are consuming more and you are benefiting from that consumption more, right? So you're consuming more and you're benefiting from that consumption more. And then what has happened to the size of the externality? Well, the externality has gotten smaller too. Now, there might be some instances where this might be perfect, a perfect subsidy. We know that A perfect subsidy is obviously going to be incredibly difficult because governments don't have perfect information and markets are changing constantly as well. So even if they did have perfect information, then it's constantly, say they had a snapshot in time of perfect information, then that might not stay true forever and actually changes. Utility is always changing and it's such a difficult construct to even be able to understand, let alone to measure. But if it was a perfect subsidy, where would the marginal private benefit line shift to? Well, if it was a perfect subsidy, then obviously there is going to be no externality. They're going to be able to manipulate consumption enough that we have our marginal private benefit equal to our marginal social benefit, equal to our marginal social cost, equal to our marginal private cost. So all of these are equal together, and obviously if all of them are equal together, then there is no externality in the market and consumption is good. Remember that externalities are market failure and positive externalities are also market failure because they are under consuming. So we want to get rid of that positive externality in the market. The government wants to get rid of all positive externalities. They don't want them to exist. So just before we finish, I just want us to have a look at some things that you might want to have a look at that are definitely going to impact the size of the subsidy or the usefulness of the subsidy, depending on what you want your outcome to be. So here are two things that you might want to have a look at just to see what the impact of them are. They're going to come in really handy for your analysis and your evaluation paragraphs, and they're just going to make your life kind of a lot more easier when you're coming up for kind of ideas to talk about in the exam. So the first one is what happens to the externality if the price elasticity of demand for a good or service that's being subsidised is below 1. So that's one of the things that I want you to have a look at. And the second thing that I want you guys to have a look at is this one here. So the impact of the subsidies if the price elasticity of supply is elastic, and also what is the impact of the subsidy if the price elasticity of supply is inelastic. So what is the impact of the subsidy if not demand is elastic or inelastic, but if supply is elastic or inelastic? So I hope that has been useful for you, and I look forward to seeing you next. Bye!